Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest webcast in Caring.com's Digital Marketing Academy. Our session today is about the ways that home care agencies can apply sales scripting to convert leads into customers. I'm Denise Grubb, a marketing director here at Caring.com, and we have a really fantastic featured expert today, Shelle Womble at corecubed, who I'll introduce in more depth momentarily. Before we dive into the presentation, though, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. This is a one-way webcast where only the presenters speak. You can ask questions, though, and we do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the presentation. In the box in the upper right of your screen, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and we'll answer any questions that we can during the time allotted, and then follow up with you if we don't get to your question. And the number one question I get every time is, will the presentation be provided afterward? I want to share it with my colleagues. The answer is yes. Both the slides and the recording will be available to you afterwards. You can really focus and listen to what Shelle is saying. You don't have to scramble to take notes. I mean, you can if you want to, but don't worry. You will get these slides afterwards. You will get the recording afterward. And also one other tip, when you're asking questions, I won't reveal who asked the question, so don't be shy about asking questions. Okay, now this is a free webinar, but you do have to listen to this brief commercial as your price of admission about Caring.com, our sponsor of today's webinar. We at Caring.com have 3 million visitors using our site's senior care resources every month. These are families and older adults who are turning to us for caregiving information, referral, and support. They also come to us for reviews about your home care agencies as well as senior living communities. In fact, we are the largest senior care review site with close to 200,000 consumer reviews posted right now, and we add thousands every month. We also have thousands of original articles across all caregiving and elder care topics, and we host dozens of online support groups for family caregivers. Lastly, Caring.com is partnered with thousands of senior care businesses nationwide, including senior living communities, including home care agencies, and including third-party organizations like Home Care Pulse. Okay, so what we're going to cover today is why all inquiry calls are part of your sales process, how your sales scripting can positively impact your branding, your close rates, and even your employees' confidence. Shelle's going to give you 5 steps to perfect inquiry call execution. Then we're going to go through Q&A, and we'll have some key takeaways and announcements. Now, I mentioned we have a fantastic speaker today. Shelle Womble is an exceptional expert in aging care marketing and sales. She's dynamic, she's energetic, she's passionate about sales. And she has 25 years of multi-state experience in the aging care arena specifically. She's been in multiple leadership positions in sales, including being director of operations and general manager for 50 branch locations in 11 states for a large home care franchise. And she's been a national sales director. So she knows this topic. She's been in your shoes. She's an exceptional leader, and she's also certified trainer and authorized partner for everything DISC and award-winning. Really, I think you're going to be impressed with what she has to share with you today. So right now, I'm going to turn it over to Shelle, giving you the keyboard and mouse at this time. Shelle, are you able to move the slides?
Yes, thanks, Denise. Thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here this afternoon and this morning for some of you in terms of time zone. And we're going to, as Denise said, talk about the inquiry process, but specifically scripting related to that. So let's see here. So Denise, I was able to move the slides, so we're good. So,
excellent.
Okay, yay. All right, so we're going to talk, as we mentioned, the home care inquiry management process, and I want to make sure that we frame this in the way, in a sales process way. I think it's very important to, this is considered our most important sales process here in our industry, and it's very important that we look at it in a way that is consistent with our brand. So most of the time, I'm not sure most agencies treat the inquiry process like a sales process. I've encountered a lot of folks who of course take their inquiries, they respond to them, they call them back, and they engage in a conversation. But I'm not so sure everybody looks at this as a very short up sales process. So we're going to talk about that today. And you know, I think, as I mentioned, a lot of folks, you know, will engage the conversation and then will answer the questions that are before them when they're on the phone with an inquiry. But are they really driving that process? So this idea of having treating it like a sales process, and then of course on top of that, making sure we have some scripted ways that we are going to handle this process will lead to great success. It allows you to set the tone with the customer and the flow of the call, and to drive that and control the entire discussion in a positive way. Okay, so we're going to first engage and talk about some best practices. So, you know, one thing that when we talk about scripting, we're going to talk specifically about sort of how we, in the conversation, when we get an inquiry or we receive a lead that we have to respond to right away, we want to be sure that that phone call, that engagement is going to be the best foot forward. And so we want to make sure that we support our brand and brand cohesion. So our way we handle this has to be in line with that. I'm a big advocate so that entire teams of agencies are trained this way and are able to answer phones or respond to inquiries that come in, maybe from lead generation sources like caring.com. And I feel like you have to have multiple layers of folks who are able to take those phone calls and run with them in a sales process manner. I do run into a lot of agencies who have like a designated person who does this, or maybe two designated people, and that's great. They probably have really mastered the skill, but I think it's really good when anybody answering the phone really can handle the basics of this and really drive that conversation in a way that empowers your staff. So it's very important. So what we're going to talk about will also help you to create this, what I feel is a sense of urgency around our responding. You know, when we have inquiries, some of them are inbound, the phone rings, we answer it, it's an inquiry, or they're outbound, we receive a lead, and we do an outbound call in order to follow up with it. And I believe having a very prescriptive process will help lead an agency to a higher close rate. It also helps you to build rapport and confidence with the individual you're talking to. It demonstrates your expertise as an agency in a very good way. It lets you drive that conversation. It gives sort of the home care employee the proper prompts to do this. So when we say scripting, we're going to say, okay, here's a process. We're going to describe a process. We're going to ask you to understand what that process looks like and adhere to that process. And then we're going to give you transitional phrases that are scripted and ways for you to be able to start the conversation, lead into the next phase of the sales process discussion. What we want to do is we want to get away from improvising and making sure that we're not just taking a call, answering questions, and improvising. We want to make sure our answers, how we handle objections in this process, are scripted in an important way. One of the important key things that I want you guys to think about as you're going through this process, or as you're listening to me, if you think to yourself, well, how do I know that I can improve my process this way? You know, one of the really great statistics out of the Home Care Pulse benchmark study that is conducted every year, one of the important statistics that they always talk about is they have a median average for an inquiry converting to a case or converting to a start of care. And the median average for that, for those that are, and I would encourage you to track all your inquiries, and hopefully you do that, and we'll talk about that. But when you track it and you know how many of them actually close to a start of care, that median average, according to the benchmark study, is 37.6%. So if you are tracking your own and you're below that number, and also too, one of the probably to be sort of above the average and be in a 75 percentile, you want to be shooting for something around 51 or 52% conversion. And so if you're below that, these processes can help you to get a handle on that and to really grow that, grow your business. Okay, so the scripting and how we handle this process, I always like to say it should be in the yes tone. So what I mean by that is, we don't want to, one of the things that's really difficult during a conversation is when people call and they say, we have these needs, and can you do this, and can you do that? And maybe further in the conversation, they are asking even more difficult questions. And what this scripting should help you be able to do is be able to answer things in a positive way with a yes tone, so that you're not saying, no, we don't do that, or no, we can't do that, or no, we're not licensed to do that, or something of that nature. What you want to be able to do is answer in a yes tone. And so an example of that we have on the screen. And one of the questions that may come up in a discussion is they may say, can I have the same caregiver every day? And so this is a great example of how we script. Now, when I'm talking about scripting, and I'm going to challenge you guys to go back to your agencies and to your table and to really come up with some really good scripting, and maybe work with your team to do this. I'm not talking about you reading these scripts on a call. I'm talking about there being a scripted way of how we answer it, and then everybody in their authentic language skills will answer the question, but with the same tenets around it. So getting back to this specific objection you might hear, and an example of how to answer it in a yes tone. Can I have the same caregiver every day? And you may say, well, we strive to create continuity of care for our clients, and some employees do have a broad availability, but some may not. So we've found that preparing or having several caregivers who are trained and familiar with your unique care needs is the best way for us to provide continuity of care. So basically you're saying, I hear that your issue is probably continuity of care, and we do feel like we have a plan to support continuity of care. But we are probably not going to have the same caregiver every day. So we didn't say no, we did say what we could do in a very positive way. And that's what we mean by scripting. We're going to talk more about that. Okay, so I mentioned that scripting ensures brand integrity. And what it also allows you, what you want to make sure you incorporate into all of this brand integrity as well, it helps people to get used to certain ways of transitioning that call in a way that is comfortable for them. It helps the person then be able to display some warmth and interest in the caller and in the situation. It also doesn't allow your team members who you're now going to empower maybe to help answer these questions. It allows them to have inaccurate response. So when you get into objections, you may want everybody to handle an objection a certain way. You don't want them to wing it. You don't want them to improvise. So having a script around that's really key. It also is a reflection of your unique brand, because your scripting can be something that you display your differentiators on. So when somebody says, how come, why does it cost more? Why is your rate $1 more than this company? You might be able to script and answer some of the value adds you place, that you do, that you perform at your agency, that allows that maybe is something that adds value to the whole discussion and can really give a really scripted good answer to the question why we might be a little more expensive on one point. So really, really critical. Okay. So before we get into like talking about just scripting and these pieces, we have to learn about the 5-step sales process. And I have this nice graphic, and you will have this graphic. You guys will receive this graphic at the end. We have a bit.ly where you can go and get this graphic and kind of a cheat sheet on this whole process I'm describing today. But this graphic is the process that you want everyone to follow in your inquiry process. You're going to have a greeting and a qualifying component. You're going to have an interviewing and a probing component. You're going to have a presenting component. You're going to be handling objections, answering questions, and then you're going to close. So this is a typical sales process, and it's very important that this sales process, along with some scripting, really will help you to gain that business and get you above those benchmark averages and have a higher conversion rate. So, and one other key thing I want to say before I move to the next slide is I want to make sure the reason we have it laid out this way, I think, is important. What I see a lot of folks do is they answer the phone, and then they jump right to present. They answer the question. The person says, "I'm calling to find out more information about your company," and then the caller goes right to presenting. Well, we are a home key. They go right into saying what we do, and they skip this phase. And when you skip that phase of this process, you are not allowing a relationship to build, and you're not allowing the trust, and you certainly are going to be presenting information when you don't fully understand what they may need. So it's real important that in this process, and new people that sometimes engage this process tend to want to just answer the question before them, and we would say do what you can to hesitate and learn these scripted transitions so that you can control this call and get through the components so that it flows the way it should. So the first one was greeting and qualifying, and I think a greeting should be very simple and friendly, but I think it should be consistent from everybody that's answering your phones in your agency. A lot of people just state their company name and the name of the person answering the phone. That's what I used to do. Good afternoon. Perfect Home Care, this is Shelley, may I help you? Something like that. Or you may want to put some kind of a memorable greeting on it, something more like what's written here. It is a great day here at Perfect Home Care. This is Shelley, how can I help you? I think it's critical that, as I said, that the greeting is universal and everyone follows it within your company, and very important. It's very important for people to say who they are when they answer the phone. I think it's one of my pet peeves when I call, and I typically will stop the call and say, who am I speaking to? If you're expecting to have that bond in that conversation, we should know who we're talking to. Very important. So that's greeting, and then when we move on to qualifying, we're going to talk about some active listening skills here. And let's see. All right, Denise, let's see here for some reason. There we go, thank you.
There we go.
Okay, all right. Before I move, I wanted to also mention, because it is so important when we're talking about our inquiries, the greeting I gave you is when you're answering the phone. That's how you want to answer the phone. But a lot of times with our leads, we are following up on leads that come to us in other ways, and it may not be through the phone. And so when we are making an outbound call, we want to make sure that we also have a scripted greeting. And this is an example of one that I think is important to demonstrate. So hello, this is Shelley from Perfect Home Care. And our friends at caring.com asked us to call you regarding your mother. We understand she needs some home care, and we know that she has dementia, and she needs someone to come out and be able to help her with her hygiene. So when I say those things, when I said dementia and hygiene, I would be referring to some very specific information I would have gotten from that lead. So I'm tying back to, I'm becoming familiar with this caller. They think I'm a familiar person because I know information about their loved one. And so when we're calling and doing an outbound call, it's very, very important that we we personalize it in a way, and we give ourselves permission to call by saying, you know, our friends at you know, caring.com gave us this information, and they said you're looking for help for your mother, and we're here to help you with that. I know that you're having some issues with her. She can't drive anymore, and we'd like to, that's certainly a service we provide, and is now a good time to talk to us about those needs. So again, very important that these components are scripted and that folks feel that you ask your employees to kind of practice with these things. So it's very, anytime they make these calls or receive these calls, they're answering and leading the call in the same way. So then we're going to talk about qualifying. So we've done our greetings, and when we're talking about qualifying, this is really about how can we help them. So we say, you know, how can we help you? Or what can we help you with today? Or what, you know, I'm calling you to talk about your mother, and you know, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on with your mother? So having a way to transition from that greeting and then going right into, I want to hear the story. So in this way, you have, how can I help you, or how can we be of service to you? Something of that nature. Everyone following a similar, the same kind of transition. And then the scripting is relatively simple. We're listening, and we're using our active listening skills, and we're allowing them to present their scenario. So this phase of the call should be relatively long, and as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to skip this phase. You want to hear what's going on. So if you have somebody that gives you a really good story and tells you everything that's going on, and they give you all the details, or maybe a chatty person and they share a lot, you're keeping notes during this time, you're agreeing, you're listening actively with your verbal skills, like nodding on the phone. Yes, I understand. Yep. Those things, but not interrupting, but we are listening. And then what you want to do is, if they're not so chatty and they just give you some basics, or if they're sort of saying, I just really want to know your rates, or I think I know what you do, and we get those calls sometimes, you still don't want to just go right to the presenting phase, which would be where you give your rates. You need to know more information before you give your rates. You need to hear more of the story. And I would say, even if you hear a very robust story, you should ask 3 good questions and have these scripted throughout this process. At the end, ask additional questions. Even if you heard a lot of that, that's why you have to have maybe multiple amounts of questions already ready to go to help you to ask the questions. So I mentioned we don't want to interrupt during this phase. We want to hear the cue. We want to be able to provide cues that we're listening. We don't want to give yes or no answers during this phase. We want to continue to take notes and continue to listen. You're listening to their story, and it's very important that we be prepared to ask some good questions around that. So when we are asking questions, I would recommend that you ask at least 3 good open-ended questions, which means they're how and why questions. If you really didn't hear, well, you need to ask as many questions as you need to ask to really understand the situation before you quote a rate. But if they've given you a really good, robust story, still try to ask 3 good questions around it. But certainly ask more than 3 if you don't have a good sense of or picture of what's happening in that home. It's a very important part of this process. And as you know, these can't be completely scripted in the way that you would just ask everybody the same questions. You have to be prepared to listen to the story and ask an appropriate question for the story they've just told you. So, and these are things that you want once you have empowered your staff to be able to do this. And by the way, you guys, if you, even if you're feeling like that's not something I want to train my staff to do, I want you to think about folks that work in your office that maybe aren't on the phone a lot. Maybe they're doing something like billing or some other component for you. They still go to the grocery store with their name tag on, or they still go maybe to church, or they still have neighbors. They still have people that want to know what they do, where they work, and you want them to still be able to talk about your brand in the same way you would in this inquiry process. So it is important that your entire team sort of gets this whole process and understands how to derive, understand the brand of your organization, and the best way to do that is through some scripting and some education of it for everybody. So here are, when you sit down to list your interviewing and probing questions and you script them out, here are some good examples of what you want to have be prepared to ask. So if there's a diagnosis that's being discussed, maybe the question is going to be something around that diagnosis. So for instance, if they say someone has dementia, you might say, tell me how that affects her daily routine. How does the dementia affect her daily routine? Can you tell me how is your, and again, you're not asking yes or no, you're trying how and why, and you're asking it to get a little more clarity in that also, even if you think you understand the picture from the story that's being told, again, it creates a balance in the sales process. It allows the consumer to see that you are very interested and that you are engaging them because you have questions about the situation. You might ask, how are activities of daily living impacted by for this person? You might ask, what other current resources are available to them? So does your mother have other friends or family who come by throughout the week or during the day? Or tell me a little bit about your mother's support system currently. If right here, I wouldn't be talking about any kind of money or payment or anything like that. We would leave that for our presentation phase, unless the caller brings it up. And typically what they'll bring up at this point is, we have Medicare, so I understand Medicare would Medicare cover this? Those are the typical questions we all know we're going to hear. And again, that's probably one of the most important things you want to script responses to. But again, I wouldn't want to engage full discussions on this point. I would say, well, I just want to know a little bit more about your mother's situation, and I'll be glad to give you all the rates, and we can talk about all that information as well on this call today. So that way they know you're going to answer it. You're not avoiding that question. You're just simply tabling it just a little bit so you can learn a little more. Another good scripted way of handling that is, I just want to make sure I understand the whole scenario before I give you a rate quote, because I want to understand all the things that we'll be needing to do for your mother. So again, then, it's like saying, asking for a quote on something without really fully understanding all the moving parts. So that's another scripted and good way to move that discussion into the next phase. So you might want to ask what other safety issues are in play, and you want to maybe ask about what attitudes they have towards having care. So, and this list can be longer than just what's listed here, but these are good ways for you to sit down at your agency and start to craft out some good questions you want folks to ask in this interviewing stage of your inquiry process. Okay, so here's some other more scripted examples of those types of questions. So you might say, you mentioned that you're concerned that your mother seems to be having some issues with her memory. Can you tell me how that affects her daily routine? So see, that's the kind of script you want to have. What types of services in the home has your mother had in the past? Tell me more about her current eating habits. What kinds of medications does your mother currently take? Is your mother able to, is she taking her medications correctly? And if, how does she manage her medications at present? So the how and why questions and scripting. And again, making sure you've asked at least 3 good questions during this process. Okay, so the other part of this is transitioning, and so we're talking about presenting now. So now we're going to move. We feel good about what we've heard in the story. We gathered what we know. We need to know in terms of what this person may be looking for. And during our presentation phase, we're going to to transition, and we're going to say something like this. Okay, I have a pretty good understanding of the care needs you're looking for your mother. So let me tell you a little bit how our program works here at Perfect Home Care and how we can help your mom. That is a good way of transitioning into the presentation phase. And again, it should be scripted. Otherwise, it's awkward sometimes for folks if you don't have a good scripted way of transitioning. When you begin to present, you want to make sure that you are going to tie back your presentation pieces to the actual story that you heard, to the details of what you heard in the story. Again, that personalizes it. It makes it, people don't feel like they don't feel like this is a scripted sales process, because number one, you're doing it in your authentic language skills, but the concepts are all there. So what you want to be able to say at the presentation phase is you want to say, we can certainly provide services in the home for your mother, what you're describing with her need for, and when it says specific need 1, specific need 2, specific need 3, these are just ways for me to tell you, give examples, go back to the language of the conversation. So we can certainly provide services in the home for your mother that will support and provide care for her dementia illness at this time. Or you might be just saying that they may say, we need help with bathing, we need help with going to the grocery store. You would tie it back to those things that they talked about. I think a lot of people use the same kind of ways to describe when they go in this phase, they kind of use the same language set when they do that. And it's very important we tie it right back to the story and what we heard. So based on what I've heard, it sounds like your mother would need a personal care aide or a home health aide or a companion, a homemaker companion service, whatever. In each state we all have different language around this personal care or the caregiver role. But at this point, it's best to say, okay, we understand you. We know we can support what you're telling us, and we think this is the most appropriate level of care. And again, sometimes you have to be, savvy about this, because you may need to, maybe at the home, when you go out to the home and you see the client, you'll have to, if you find there's other needs that have been presented that weren't presented during the call, you may have to sort of alter that discussion, but hopefully you vetted out all the potential needs and you give them an accurate quote on what that level of care would be that you'd be providing. And that's when you quote them the rate. That's when you would say, our hourly rates for home health aid services in our area are $25 an hour, and our employee would be able to provide assistance with the specific need number 1 they gave, specific need number 2 they gave, and the specific need number 3 they gave. So again, tying it back to that discussion. And then typically that's how you get into the pricing piece of it. And then this is when you'll start hearing a lot of objections. Usually after you present, we can do this, and here's the level of care we would provide, and here's the cost for that. You may then enter into a discussion. What our next steps are, we would like to come out to the home and go through our admission process or our home conference with you. And then you're going to probably get questions. So that is the part of your presentation phase of that. And then you're going to get objections. So the big part of scripting, probably the most important part of scripting, is handling objections. And so I recommend that you sit down with your team and you list all the common objections you're going to hear that you've heard from conversations, and you write out an appropriate response for each one, and that your team helps you to devise those written, yes-toned ways of handling objections. And the goal isn't for you're going to give a response to the objection, and either they're going to act on it or not act on it. So this is where people have probably the most challenges with this part of the discussion. So we're going to talk about some common objections, but pricing is usually the first one we hear. And sometimes we hear the next one here is a sample. We talk about maybe they need someone that they have skilled needs, and we maybe can't do those in our state without a nurse, and so we have to talk about that piece of the objection. So these are all good ways of handling that. So the objection for the nursing might be: a nurse is required in our state to give insulin injections, and we can assist you with identifying a medical agency in the area that can provide the morning insulin injections. We're a non-medical agency, and injections have to be provided by a medical agency. So see how this entire script is, we again answered the question, but we didn't say, no, we can't do a nurse. We can't provide a nurse. And that's what you want to avoid doing. You want to be able to say what you can do, and for them to understand this in a real yes tone branded way. So let's talk about some other objections you're going to hear. Throughout here, you'll see I've got a couple of very important examples here. But even with these examples, I would challenge you guys to go back to the table and be creative about these responses. You know, think about the yes tone. Think about what you, for every agency I meet agencies who handle this inquiry process a little differently. Some agencies won't take cases unless they're 40 hours a week, and some agencies, you know, everyone has a very different way of doing this. So you have to be prepared to explain why you do that, or what you do that's different in your market in a real yes tone friendly way. So if somebody says price is too high, here's an example of a good script for that. Perfect Home Care is very competitive in the market for home care service rates, and the majority of our hourly rate goes to our employee wages, and we pride ourselves in recruiting and maintaining the best employees. So our rate of services do reflect the quality of services we will provide you. That's it. That's all you have to say. And usually, you know, that's a really probably that's going to handle the objection. Either at that point they're going to you know, then they have to make a decision of whether they can afford it or not, obviously. But there you've been able to explain your rate in a very yes-toned way. So maybe they say, why are we not able? Why would the caregiver not be able to provide these nursing duties? So, and again, I mentioned earlier, we looked at the other script, same script. We take great pride in quality of services we provide. And of course, we follow our state and federal laws as part of our quality program. And home care aides aren't permitted to perform skilled nursing services in our state. So again, that's actually a little different than the script we just talked about, but another good way to handle the objection of saying why we can't do that without just saying, oh, we're just not allowed. Well, we have said we're not allowed, but we say it in a more professional way. So a couple more examples, because I think these are important to kind of do one by one. And again, we're almost close to the end of our inquiry process phase. So we've done our greeting and qualifying, we've heard the story, we've started to present, and now we're handling the objections. So they might ask you, okay, well, tell me how your employees are selected and trained. And you know, again, writing these scripts and having the ability to kind of explain your differentiators in here is a really good way. So one good way would be to say, you know, we have a really robust recruiting and selection process, and many of our employees actually come to us and they're referred to us by our existing really good quality caregiver base. So there's one scripted way. What do we do? What do we do if we don't like who you send? Well, you know, it's a top priority for us at our agency that you are comfortable with who we send you. So we'll replace folks that you're not comfortable with. So again, you know, it gives, if you have these scripts and everyone answers these things in the same way, that is how your brand kind of develops. That's what your reputation becomes, and it's a very important aspect. I only want this type of person in my home, and sometimes that comes in the form of a discriminatory kind of request, and I know those can be tricky. But one good way to respond to that, and the way I used to, at my agency, that we were trained to answer, to say Perfect Home Care is an equal employment opportunity company, and we follow state and federal laws governing employment, but we only hire qualified, and we screen our candidates very carefully, and kind of leave it at that area, being able to say, we follow, we're an equal employment opportunity company, but the people we send to you, I would feel comfortable sending to, so you're kind of not even addressing the issue that maybe they're saying in terms of, what they're saying in terms of a discriminatory request potentially, but you are scripting a response that's appropriate and saying, we're going to send you a qualified person that's been through our training and our selection process. How much of the rate that you're charging me goes to the employee? So that's another question you might get. And a good response might be, well, the majority of our rate goes to the employee. This is where you would be able to say, the majority of the rate goes to the employee's pay rate and their wages, taxes, insurance, bonding, training, benefits, and also the cost of managing that care makes up our bill rate, and we're competitive in that rate in our market, and leave it at that. That's how you would answer that question in a scripted way. Are you insured or bonded, or what is insurance and bonding? So again, another, you just want to make sure that you're describing your process, that you don't have people winging it, you don't have improvisation with this, you don't have somebody just guessing. I think if you get an objection that nobody knows how to respond to, sometimes the best way is just to say, you know what, that's the first time I've had that question and I'm not sure exactly how to respond to that, but I'm going to talk to my leadership and call you back to discuss that question you have. So that's another sort of scripted way to handle something you're not sure that comes your way as a curveball. So once you've handled all the questions that they have and you've handled the objections, and in a professional way, you're going to wrap up that process and ask, so do you have any additional questions? And then you're going to be moving right into that close phase. And so the scripted kinds of ways you can move into that close phase is, these are some of my favorite. They're pretty commonly used, and they're simple. How soon would you like to get started? When would you like us to come out and do our initial home visit with you? So these are ways to, you're not waiting for them to go, okay, I think I'll go ahead and have your services. You're saying, how soon would you like to get started? When can we come out and do our home visit with you? If they won't agree to these things, you want to close it to some kind of follow-up process then. So you might want to say, may I go ahead and take down your address, your email, your phone number, because we will certainly send you some literature or email you some information if that's what you want. But we also would like to follow back up with you in a few days and see if you have additional questions or see if you're ready to move on having care. So you definitely want to ask and close to some kind of follow-up process, and then you definitely want to do that process, right? You want to make sure you actually follow up as you've indicated. And then I think nowadays too, it's really important because people are really busy and sometimes they're making these phone calls at work. Asking what is the best time and method to reach somebody is an important thing. And again, making sure you do that. And then of course, lastly, you want to make sure, how did you hear about us? Because we should always be finding out how people heard about us, and we should be tracking that. And we should know where our business comes from. That's salesmanship 101. And so that should be part and scripted. And I would encourage you to come up with I think a lot of people, when they get an inquiry, they have like a blank face sheet in front of them where they're capturing data about the person and they're writing it down. What I would encourage each of you to do is to script out some things in this process so they follow the process. Utilize the tool I'm going to give you guys at the end of this to do that. And certainly, that's a service I provide at corecubed. If you're interested in having some help with doing these scripting or coming up with a nice template that all of your folks would use when they're handling an inquiry to capture this and to also stay on track with the sales process and the scripting, that is something obviously I would be able to help you with, but very important. So just a few final scripting notes. Make sure your scripts are in written form. Again, that doesn't mean you're reading from them. It means people are practicing with them. They're understanding the concept behind them, and that's when they're responding, they're using their own language skills with the concept in the same manner, and you need to practice in the yes tone. Train your team. Anybody that's answering the phones needs this kind of sales-based training, in my opinion. You test your team. I would either mystery shop or listen to them doing some of these calls and give them feedback, emphasize the strengths and areas for improvement. And if you hear them answer something in a way they shouldn't answer it, make sure they know and help them to understand and to craft the right response so they answer it the right way the next time. It's important to correct the team. Again, you don't want to wing it. You don't want improvisation. Listening to your folks and gathering your folks to help create this scripted material is ideal. Some of them have a lot more experience than you think and have heard a lot more things, and they can maybe give you their perspective on how it might be a better way to script something when you're trying to respond to something. Rehearsing, practicing is very important, so you can maybe do some role playing with your group. Modify, so every conversation is unique, so you have to modify as necessary. People have to feel comfortable flowing in and out with that modification. And customized, display your differentiators in your brand. Make sure you discuss in this process, you incorporate what makes you a good agency. There's so many of us in the market now. We want to stand out and make sure that you stand out in this process. All right. So our key takeaways for today, scripting, training, rehearsing, mastering, that all equals success. So make sure you have a specific methodology for your inquiries. You follow that sales process, be consistent with it, ask your folks to get comfortable with that process. I encourage you to empower and train your employees to be able to do this, to answer phones and to be able to call and follow up on leads. I think we tend to lose leads quickly if we don't have a sense of urgency and can respond to them right away. And if the primary inquiry taker person's not available, you don't want to lose that lead. So people should feel comfortable doing this. Make sure they're versed in all their scripts. And your brand and your company personality will shine through when your employees master the sales scripting.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Shelle. We're now going to take questions. So let me just grab those for you. Okay, my favorite question. Can I have a copy of the presentation? The answer is yes. Both the presentation and the recording will be made available for all attendees. Okay, so here's a question for you, Shelle.
Okay.
The question is, if they're not comfortable giving rates, what's the best way? Could you just reiterate or cover in a little bit more depth if the caller has said, if they're asking about rates and the agency is not comfortable or not at the point of the conversation where they want to get into that detail and lose the lead, what's the best way for them to handle that situation? So
if I understand the question correctly, it's somebody that that's going to balk on going through your process with you, and they want to know, what is the rate? I just want the rate. Is that exactly? Yes, okay. And there's a concern about just giving them the answer will lose the lead. You'll lose the call. I think in those cases you might want to script a range, and then what you would say is well, our rates for personal care services range between this rate and this rate, and you have that worked out. But we really need to learn a little bit more about everything that all your needs and what would, the acuity level of the person who needs these needs. And then we can give you a more accurate rate. And possibly we can do that if we come out to the house. But I would then give them a range, because I think the fear is that we don't want to say not give them a rate and lose them, but then you don't want to also maybe just give all your rates out if it's a shopper, mystery shopper or something like that. So the best way to handle that is to give a range and explain that the range, you're giving a range because you you really need to learn more about what their needs are to give you a more accurate rate.
Great. And then we had another question about how long should that phone call last?
Well, I think it's going to depend on the caller. You definitely want, that's a good question, because I've had calls that last 45 minutes and I've had calls that last 15 minutes. I think ideally it's going to be somewhere between 15 minutes and 45. You're going to see most calls go, depending how chatty the caller is and how many questions and how much of the story they want to tell. But if your call is less than 15 minutes, I think it's not going to be, you've missed the mark, because part of that upfront work to gather the story, listen, ask questions is really critical, and in forming a quick relationship with them on the phone. And to sell anybody anything, you have to, there has to be a little bit of a trust factor there, and you have to develop that. So that's, I would say, on average, if I had to give a number, I'd say 30 minutes would be a good amount of time.
Okay. And then we have an individual who's asking about the follow-up from the initial call, if you didn't successfully get them to commit to an in-home assessment from that call, can you give some guidance on the type of follow-up email, like what kind of scripting or messaging you would use in that follow-up email so that you could get into the home for the home assessment?
Yeah, I think it would depend on why they didn't commit. So like if they say, we've made other arrangements, my sister now is available and she's coming, that's when I think you would want to ask, you still want to follow up with those situations, because to me those sound like band-aids that they're putting in place for the inevitable. And I mean, I don't know how many of you on the phone, I've been working in the space for almost 30 years, and only this last year I started, I care for my own parents have care. And so I became a customer. And so my dad did not, I've been doing it for 30 years, he didn't want the care. And it took months before we got full-time care in place, and he allowed it and didn't keep firing him. So I think when I say that to you, because I think that you have to understand why they maybe turn you away, because I would think it's very appropriate to call on a certain frequency just to say, hey, I just want to check and see how things are going with mom. Is the care that you put in place working for you? You just wanted to let you know, we're still available. We're still here if you're interested in having our services. And I would do that until they say, don't call anymore. And some have done that. Some have said, you don't need to check on me anymore. And if that's the case, the other thing you can continue to do is, if you by permission gathered their email addresses and you have a really great newsletter, you can stay top of mind with them with the newsletter. But things change on a dime for these families. So I would say up to 6 months, I'd be continuing to follow up on some frequency that felt like you weren't that you weren't annoying them.
That's great. And there's another question that's similar to what you were just discussing, and that is, as part of that follow-up cadence, how soon after you've spoken to them on the phone, let's say that you haven't yet closed or created an in-home assessment, how soon after speaking with that prospect should you follow up with another phone call and or an email?
I would do it within 24 hours the second time. If the situation is just what you just said, Denise, it would be within 24 hours. The first week is critical. The first couple of days, it's okay to do it maybe more often. But what you want to know is what happened. Are they still just going without care? What are the situations happening there? And that would then show you what kind of cadence you wanted to have after you know what happened. So they put temporary care in, then maybe you'd follow up in a month, right? But if they don't have care in place and you know that they really need it, or it sounds like sometimes inquiries call and they say, we think we're going to need this pretty soon. But they're not sure. Mom does this, but she's still driving. You're looking for that, really, honestly, and this is sad, we're looking for that incident to happen that really changes the tone quickly of what they need. So the first couple of days I think are critical for follow-up, but then maybe it's every week or once a month, depending on how it was left, what's going on there. And if it still feels like in crisis, then you need to have a quicker cadence. If it feels like it's kind of under control but could fall out of control, have a looser cadence. But for 6 months, follow up.
So you have the call, you acquire the email, you follow up with the phone call right away with the follow-up email so they have a summary of the information you've provided, and then you call back within 24 hours. Is that correct?
Yep, I would email. I would do it for, if you never get them on the phone, so say if it's an outbound thing and you never get them on the phone, I would probably follow up every day of the whole week until I get somebody or get a response.
Fantastic. And I just want to mention for everybody, I believe I mentioned at the beginning, but Shelle is with corecubed, and we weren't able to take each and every one of you through your specific scripting needs, but corecubed can do that with you. And at the end of this session, you'll be prompted if you want to get in touch with corecubed. We are running out of time for specific questions, but we will follow up with anyone we didn't get to. And we have a really interesting tool. Several of you asked, how can I share this with my team? They really need to learn this. corecubed has generously offered the sales process tip sheet, which you can have free of charge. It will be in the follow-up materials we send you right after this webinar. Within an hour after this webinar, I'm going to send you this link. And so that you have that, but it'll also be in the follow-up materials we send out tomorrow. And we have for you how to contact corecubed as well, so that you can do that deep dive with Shelle and corecubed and optimize the sales scripting and sales process for your team to acquire more customers for your agency, whether you're following up on referrals from caring.com or taking inbound calls. Okay, we really appreciate everyone that asked questions. So thankful to Shelle and corecubed for doing this session for us today. It actually came out of, it was a question from our last webinar that we didn't have time to dive into. So Shelle was kind enough to take us through it today. Really appreciate that, Shelle.
Thank you,
and yeah, thank you. And I want to just thank everyone for taking the time. I hope you found the information helpful. We do want your feedback. I'm going to prompt you with a brief survey right after I close the webinar. Please don't be shy. We truly value your insights, and we hope you'll share your thoughts with us. I'm also going to have a link to that survey in the follow-up email. So if you miss it when we close the browsers, then you can catch it in the email. Do take the survey. Do let us know what you loved best, what you'd like to see us do differently in the future. Thank you so much, Shelle. Is there anything else you wanted to add real quick before I close it?
No, thank you for the opportunity. And if anyone, as Denise says, has any kinds of questions, I'm certainly available to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.